Hello, I'm Jeremy, the Internet Scrum Master. I have over 20 years experience in tech and finance. I've worked across server and application administration, deployments, QA, service desk. For the past 10 years, I've been a full-time Scrum Master. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're talking about Agile and Scrum. More specifically, why are these things not the same thing? Why do we have two terms? They seem to be used interchangeably a lot of places. They're not the same, they're related. That's what we're going to talk about. So what is Agile? Agile isn't a process. It's not something you do. It's a philosophy. It's values and principles to guide behavior. It started in 2001 by a group of people representing several lightweight software development frameworks. So back then, software development was really thought of more like a manufacturing line, an assembly line. You've got your big upfront design. Once that's set, you get the tooling put in place, you do the run, you package it up and you send it to your customers. And when software development started, that's how people thought because that's what they were accustomed to. And that works for some sorts of software, but in the 90s, as technology was moving very much faster, there was a strong need to be able to deliver software, quality software, at a faster rate. Long story short, they all agreed on the values and the principles. They signed the document, they put it on a website, and it's sat there unchanged since 2001. But more than a philosophy, it also serves as an umbrella term under which those initial frameworks and later on things like Kanban and scaled approaches, large-scale Scrum, scaled Agile framework. I know there's a passionate group who say the scaled Agile framework, or SAFe, isn't Agile at all. Well, yeah, I think SAFe has a greater risk of going against an Agile value or principle than Scrum. But in the wrong hands, Scrum can be anti-Agile. So it's hard for me to just make a blanket statement against that. And I've certainly seen teams that use SAFe very effectively and live to those Agile values and principles. That may be a topic for another video. Well, what is Scrum anyway? Scrum's what most people know, right? Stand-ups, planning, retrospectives, sprints, all that. As a side note, user stories, while heavily used in Scrum, are never actually mentioned in the Scrum Guide. They actually originate from extreme programming. So this is one example of a complementary practice. Scrum intentionally leaves the framework lightweight to allow teams to work in a way that is best for them. This is the idealistic view of Scrum, where the company you work for fully understands the concepts of self-managing teams and the intention of Scrum. In fact, that's the statement that applies to this entire video. Your mileage may vary. All right. So the first version of Scrum, the official guide to Scrum, wasn't published until 2010. However, Scrum itself has been around since 1995, prior to the Agile Manifesto in 2001. The authors of the Scrum Guide were signatories on the Agile Manifesto, and then since 2010, the Scrum Guide itself has been updated several times, taking feedback from the community, iterating on the framework itself. Today, Scrum is by far the most widely used framework under the Agile umbrella, followed by Kanban and the scaled approaches. When teams look to adopt a complementary practice, oftentimes they're unsure if it's the right thing to do, or maybe it's better to say sometimes the Scrum Master is unsure if it's the right thing for the team to do, and the team is looking to the Scrum Master for guidance. In that case, I walk the team through the options. I don't make the decision for them, but I'll present them with the Agile Manifesto, the principles and the values, and we'll look at the options and we'll say, of these options, which of these aligns best with the principles and the values. That's usually the one to go with. If they both do, then pick which one you think you want to do more, right? Not hard. Next, we're going to look at the Agile values and principles and see how they align with Scrum. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We all rely heavily on ticketing systems and Zoom or Teams, WebEx, whatever it might be. I've had people, when Teams goes down, they'll send an email and say, hey, Teams is down, I can't work, so I'm going to go ahead and just take a break, and hopefully it's back on this afternoon. I mean, how do you argue against that when when those tools are essential. You have very few co-located teams these days. You're either everybody's remote, or you have 4 or 5 offices that are located across the globe on different time zones. They are absolutely essential. But when they get in the way of people talking to each other, that's where we stray from the value, right? Real agility comes from humans interacting, solving problems in real time, collaborating cross-functionally, and building relationships. So how does Scrum align? Well, first, the daily stand-up, the daily Scrum fosters communication among the team members. Second, self-managed teams are empowered to decide how the work gets done. What does that mean in practice? What gets done is a conversation between the product owner, the stakeholders, and the customers. They decide what we want. The development team takes that what and decides how that gets done. Moving on. Working software over comprehensive documentation. People willfully misread this to mean documentation doesn't need to happen. Documentation does need to happen. It just should be a small percentage of the amount of work you're doing, and it should be very focused on the needs. Rather than having a 20 or an 80-page design document that details all of these things that your software is doing that nobody's going to read ever again, don't do that, right? Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to note the code in the code for other developers when they go into it later, and they can read it in line when they're developing. We're going to make other more high-level documentation, kind of how-to documents that we're going to give to our support staff so they can help our customers. And that's about it. But it does need to be done. How does this align with Scrum? Well, the increment is the real measure of progress. The definition of done ensures the work meets the agreed upon standards. Short, focused sprints encourage frequent delivery over exhaustive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Another one that's easy to misread. I don't think people misread it as much as the documentation one, but it's good to call out because I've been in finance, I know in healthcare and in telecom and other things that are highly regulated. Contracts and NDAs are essential. You can't do business without them. It says, instead of negotiating terms and throwing them over the fence, you work with your customer during the process, throughout the legal process, as much as you can possibly do it within the requirements of your industry. Get those people talking together. Get your developers talking with their developers as soon as possible, as frequently as possible, and with as little friction as possible. Right? Collaboration helps us solve the right problem, not just the problem we thought we had when the contract was signed. How does Scrum align? Well, the sprint review allows stakeholders to inspect the product and provide real-time feedback. The product owner role ensures customer needs and priorities are constantly reflected in the backlog. Backlog refinement, while not an official part of the Scrum framework, it is a good complementary practice. If you look at the Scrum guide, the sprint planning is, you're looking at like 2, maybe 4 hours, which is a lot to keep anybody in a meeting. 90 minutes is about the max that you really should keep people in a meeting. And if we have backlog refinement, then we can split that planning session up into 2. It gives people a time to think through things between the meetings. Responding to change over following a plan. Well, Agile doesn't eliminate planning. Obviously, it embraces it. But Agile acknowledges that change is inevitable. Customers change. Priorities change. Markets change. So we make flexible plans. We plan with the assumption that we're going to need to plan again, and then we're going to have to plan again after that. And then something better or more important comes along, we pivot. That's not a failure, it's responsiveness. That doesn't mean these things should happen every single sprint. In fact, if they're happening every single sprint, then there's a bigger problem going on that needs addressed that's going to be outside the scope of what a Scrum Master is really going to be able to solve. Certainly, Scrum Master should address that, but that's going to be more of an organizational issue. How does Scrum align? The sprint review allows stakeholders to inspect the product and provide real-time feedback. The product owner ensures customers' needs and priorities are constantly reflected in the product backlog, including customer input to shape upcoming work. Those are the 4 values and how they align with Scrum. On now to the 12 principles. Customer satisfaction through early and continuous delivery. Scrum delivers a usable increment every sprint, ensuring early ongoing value. Welcome changing requirements even late in the process. Scrum has the product backlog and it's constantly refined to reflect shifting priorities. Deliver working software frequently. In Scrum, every sprint produces a potentially shippable product, ideally. Business people and developers must work together daily. While in Scrum, the product owner and developers collaborate continuously. The daily Scrum promotes regular communication. Build projects around motivated individuals. Scrum teams are self-managing and empowered to make decisions on their own, as we talked about earlier. Face-to-face conversation is the most effective way to communicate. This one is important to call out because when the Agile Manifesto was written, video conferencing over remote was very, very much in its infancy. We're talking about, these were like WebEx things in conference rooms, in buildings, usually just talking to other conference rooms in the same building. I mean, maybe a conference room in a remote office if you're lucky, but even then the bandwidth for that was very low, even in corporate environments. So when they say face-to-face communication, what they're talking about is actually walking over to somebody's desk, looking them in the eye and saying, hey, can you help me with this problem? Obviously, that's no longer the case, but we've reinterpreted the value to include video conferencing. Working software is the primary measure of progress. In Scrum, the increment is the artifact that approves the progress. Okay, Agile promotes sustainable development. Scrum promotes sustainable velocity through regular sprint cycles. This means we find a pace that we can sustain indefinitely. Okay, quick note on this one. Sustainable velocity means a consistent velocity over a very long number of sprints, 6, 12, years long of sprints. If we can create a velocity, 20 story points a sprint, 30 story points a sprint, if it's every sprint and we're doing somewhere between, say, 28 and 32 story points, that's where we want to be. A lot of managers and a lot of leadership, they look at the velocity and they're saying, okay, well, your velocity was 20, in January and it's still 20 today. Shouldn't you be now doing 40? Aren't you guys getting better? Why aren't you going faster? Why aren't you getting better? It's not how velocity works. This probably deserves its own video, but really quickly, when we know that we have the consistent velocity, we can estimate our backlog. We can see if we have a velocity of 20 and we have 100 story points in the backlog estimated, we know it's going to take us 5 sprints to get that done. That's what velocity is. Continuous attention to technical excellence. In Scrum, the definition of done in team retrospectives promotes code quality and process improvement. Simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. In Scrum, the backlog refinement, sprint planning, helps teams focus on what adds value. The best designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Scrum empowers teams to decide how best to implement solutions, encouraging innovation. Regular reflection and adaptation. Well, in Scrum, the sprint retrospective is designed exactly for this principle, inspect and adapt. So that's it in a nutshell. Agile is the mindset, Scrum is a structured way to live it. Agile is timeless, a philosophy, hasn't changed since the inception. The values and the principles resonate, even if they're reinterpreted a little bit for this century. Scrum adapts. It evolves. Scrum itself takes feedback from customers and it iterates on the framework. But the change is always done with the values and the principles of Agile in mind. Okay, you don't need to do Scrum to be Agile. You can be Agile and not do Scrum. If you're doing Scrum right, with collaboration, feedback, and trust at its core, you're probably on the path to true agility. Conversely, you can do Scrum without being Agile. It's referred to as Agile in name only, where the environment still has a command and control mindset. This is what this looks like. It looks like people using Agile terminology in job postings to attract high quality talent. And then once they're on board, they implement a command and control mindset and they don't give people the freedom they need to operate. I've worked for companies like that. It's not fun. especially when you know what you're doing is right and they're telling you that you're wrong. It feels like being gaslit sometimes in places like that. If that's where you are right now, you can do what you can to try to change that from within. But at some point, you might just need to look for a better environment. So thanks for sticking with me. Let me know in the comments what other Agile Scrum related videos you want to see. Until next time, take care.